Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to Rufi Thorpe. Rufi!
Oh, thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here. And obviously, I want to get into exactly like how Raymond came into my life and Larry. And I feel like this community is very much like my roots and my like part of my origin story, if you will. So a couple of things I wanted to say. One, I feel like because we're all writers, what I want to talk about is not just like this newest book that came out, The Knockout Queen, but kind of just being really transparent and honest about how I became a published writer and what that looks like and how you can also do that, both from a writing point of view and from a publishing point of view. And so if you have questions as we're going along, you can put them in the chat. And then when we move to a question and answer, then we can look through the chat and find those questions so you don't forget them. Or you can wait till the end, it doesn't matter. The other thing I was going to ask for is I like to at these events, as you know, this is an incredibly difficult time for independent bookstores. And so they need our support. They're vital to our communities. They're like fostering community and discussion, and we need them. So the three bookstores that I want to support today are Sleepless in Laguna, Mystery Inc. in Huntington Beach, and Book Carnival in Orange. And so I'm going to be buying a book from each one of those stores. And so I would love it if in the comments section you could recommend me a book. It doesn't have to be something that came out recently. It can be absolutely anything, a book that you really love. And then that way I get some new reads and bookstores get some more business. And who knows, maybe you guys will see a book rec on there that you want to pick up too. Okay, so I'm going to kind of do this in a chronological order where I'm going to go through my career from the beginning to now. And so I'll actually end with Knockout Queen. But I want to just talk a little bit about kind of where I came from and how I wound up on this journey. So I sort of started fiction writing because of a California state sponsored government program called California State Summer School for the Arts, which is a like pretty much almost fully funded summer camp program to encourage arts in teenagers. And so I went for writing. And at the time I had never written fiction. And I took a fiction class and I was so baffled because it was not natural to me. I didn't understand what story was. I found like the concept of how do you know something's the beginning? Like, how do you know the difference between a story and just a series of events? What means that something's the ending? More things come after that. How do you know when it's over? What does that mean? What is a character arc? Do people really actually change? Is that just an illusion? Like, all these things were very mysterious to me. And so I think I approached fiction writing from a point of view of someone enchanted and maddened and vexed, as opposed to someone that like thought that they were good at it. And I think that in a lot of ways that really helped me. So when I went to college, I went to college when I was 16. I left high school and moved to New York City. And so I was a little bit like young and diffuse in terms of understanding what I wanted to do. But I knew that I wanted to be a writer. And my whole idea was, well, okay, I'll become an academic and then I can be like Iris Murdoch. Your plan should never be to be Iris Murdoch. That's like an impossibly tall order. But my plan was that, okay, I'll get a PhD in philosophy, right? And then that will enable me to write fiction on the weekends or something, or on the summers, because it seemed like such an impossible thing to actually dream of being a fiction writer and making a living at it. And then it was really only when I was staring down applying to PhD programs in philosophy and understanding how insecure that job market was and how many years and how little it would pay and all of that, I was like, oh, that's a lot of work for not a lot in return. Like, this might not be a good plan. So I decided to apply to graduate schools in creative writing, and I did not get in. And so, like any good failure, I moved back in with my mother. And that is when I wound up meeting Raymond, because she had started taking his class at Orange Coast Community College. And so I took it too. And it was such a revelation because the writing workshops that I'd been in college had been very literary, and they had not really talked at all about all those basic mechanics of, you know, payoff scenes and how to make likable characters and how to write an engaging first line. Like, and so then just it felt like being given the keys to the kingdom. Like I had been trying to engineer like an automobile from scratch, and then someone just gave me blueprints. I was like, oh, well, this is going to save me years of time figuring out how all these, knobs and levers work. And Raymond also has like a wonderful lack of snobbery, as I'm sure that you all know, and this really egalitarian vision. And I think that that's one of the things that I really take from him. I think storytelling, like a decent singing voice, is actually a really common gift because it is a human core gift. I mean, we've been sitting around a fire, shooting the shit since we became a species. And I think that the ability to be a raconteur, the ability to tell stories, is fundamental to our nature. And I think absolutely anybody who is perversely determined to do it can become a writer. And I think that Raymond taught me that. And he always would say, and it's still something that comforts me to this day, don't worry about it. Everything can be fixed later. You can just fix it later. And so for me, I think that that very much influenced me to become the kind of writer who writes big, messy first drafts, and I write a lot and I throw away a lot. So after, a couple semesters in Raymond's class and going to Palm Desert, his writing retreat in the summertime, I applied again to graduate schools and I got in. And so, it was at this time in Raymond's class that I had written a short story, Larry's Right. And he said, this feels like the beginning of a novel, really more than a short story. And so I thought, I just was scared. I didn't know how to write a novel. And so I kind of decided to write it as interconnected short stories, each one from a different point of view. And so that was the first book that I ever wrote, called The Violin Face. And so then I went to graduate school and I had a really difficult time. I think that I was a more just sort of naturally commercial writer, but I also think I hadn't figured out some basic things about myself as a writer. So I'm really have a super feverish kind of melodramatic, hypercharged imagination. And I gravitate towards plots where a lot of really dramatic things happen. And, my sense of what's normal skews surreal a little bit. I think I have a weird family and I know weird people, and everybody that I know, their life is very strange. And so I tend to write characters with these big, crazy backstories, because to me, that's how life is. And it took me a long time. It was actually when I was in graduate school, I was having drinks with this other writer, and he said, it's so funny, you're funny in person, but your work is not funny at all. And it had never even occurred to me that I could be funny in my work. And it was as I began to explore that all of a sudden there was this dynamic, because the heaviness of the material I wanted to explore was then leavened kind of by the comedy. And one of the things though about grad school, I kind of just didn't really fit in. And at the end, I had this sort of antagonistic relationship with one of my teachers, who basically was just like, you should find something else to do. You're not good at this and you're still young. You could do anything. And I just hate to see you go down this path where you are just destined to fail. I'm saying this with love. Stop now. And I went home and I cried, obviously, because I was, 22 or something. I was a baby. I was 23, I think. And I just thought, well, am I going to stop? Because I really admired this woman. She was the reason that I had gone there artistically. I thought she was just amazing. And she was saying she'd read, 10 stories by me. And she was like, you don't have it, kid. And so did I still want to do it if I was bad? And I was like, I do. Because it's not about me, it's about the thing. I'm in love with books, and there's no reason to stop being in love with them and trying to write them just because I'm not good at it. I already knew that in a certain sense. It's what else is being a struggling writer but coming to terms with the fact that you're not great at it. So in a lot of ways, even though that was really antagonistic at the time, I think it was a big gift, because once the person you admire most in the whole world tells you to give up and you don't, then like your problems are in many ways solved. Like your fate is decided. You're going to just keep going. And so that's what I did. I moved back home to California after graduate school because, again, I didn't know what else to do and I had no money. And at that time, it was like 2008, I think, and it was right at the beginning of the financial collapse. And I could not find a job for nothing. It was terrible. And I finally got a job at the Ruby's on the pier in Balboa Island, wearing one of those little outfits. And like, the tips were not good. They were not good. I was used to working in fine dining. And there was a lot about that time that was kind of like fun and makeshift and weird. But every night I would go home and basically like drink a bottle of wine and just submit short stories to magazines. And one of the things is that I'm a bad short story writer. And so I really had, I think, nothing published by the time that The Girls from Corona Del Mar came out. So there was this sort of like dark time where I was working at Ruby's and I was trying to write a novel. So in graduate school, I wrote another novel. See, here's what I'm leading up to is in my mind, and I think I heard it in Raymond's class actually, was the statistic that it's your fourth novel that gets published. And so self-fulfilling prophecy or not, when I heard that, I was like, gosh, I better get busy writing some crappy novels so that I can get to my fourth one that will be good and get published. So I'd written The Violin Face, and then I wrote this very bizarre novel in grad school called Proverbs from Hell that I can't even get into. It was very weird. And then I wrote a novel called Bunny Lampert. So remember that name because it will come back. And then it was actually during this time that I won third place in a contest and I got to go to Lithuania, which, as you know from Larry's little intro, winds up playing a role later. And then at around that time, Raymond again like saved my life for a second time by recommending that I get a chance to teach at Orange Coast Community College. And so I started teaching community college, which was way more rewarding and fun than waiting tables, and gave me some like small amount of feeling like I was becoming a respectable, credible adult and functioning, even though I was still making like no money. And then I got married and fell in love and had a baby. And my husband was just finishing his PhD. And so we had to move to Washington, D.C. Because he was going to do a postdoc. He's a neuroscientist. And so we moved and realized all of a sudden that the amount that I would get paid at an adjuncting job would be less than the amount of daycare. So the whole idea was, why don't you finish your novel and try to sell it during this year when the baby is little? And that's an insane and stupid plan. I can't believe that was our plan, but somehow it worked. And so the novel that I'd been writing when I was pregnant was The Girls from Corona Del Mar, and I finished it after the baby was born, mainly because we just moved to a new place and I had no friends and the baby was a good sleeper. It was really lucky even that I got to do that. And how the agent thing came about. You would think, oh, you went to grad school, you must have known writers and you had some connection. No, this is not what happened. I thought, I'll start and I want to get rejected by my dream agent first. And then so I'll make a list of the agents that I want most in the world, and then I'll just work my way down. And so there was one agent who for me was sort of head and shoulders above the rest because she, represents Jane Smiley and Elizabeth Stroud and Karen Joy Fowler and Ruth Ozeki. And just, the list goes on. Her client list is absolutely out of control bonkers. And she was way out of my league. And so I wrote her this insane, deranged, overly personal email. It is not the way that you're supposed to do it at all. And I just said, I love every author on your list. And I'm not really like any of them, but I know that I love you because you love them. And I've read all these interviews with you, and you said in this one, this thing. And I feel like the thing that she said was that she knew she wasn't the smartest, but that didn't matter because she'd worked the hardest. And I was like, that's me. That's me. That's how I feel about my life. And so she wrote back, and it was a Friday, and she was like, you're in luck because it's a Friday and I'm in a good mood. So send me the novel, but don't waste my time. Which I was like, okay, I guess I'll try not to. And so I sent her The Girls from Corona Del Mar, and she read it, and she had some pretty big edits. And I think she was afraid that I wouldn't be able to do them. Writers have different levels of rewrites that they feel comfortable doing. And I happen to be very flexible in terms of rewrites, which has served me in good stead. Being able to hear people and take in criticism and then change, it's useful not only in terms of learning and getting better, but then functioning with agents and editors as you kind of move forward. So I think in that sense, being in a workshop like Raymond's is just really good practice. And luckily everything that she was saying to me made perfect sense. It was like somebody just turning the lights on and you're like, oh, of course that should have been that way. That's much smarter. And so I did all the rewrites, and then she was like, I love it. I would love to represent you. And she sold it at auction 10 days later. And it was like this life-changing kind of thing. So that was The Girls from Corona del Mar. And she sold it to Knopf, where my editor was Jennifer Jackson, who is an amazing human being. And I've had the really lucky and unprecedented experience of being able to keep my editor through all 3 books. And not a lot of people get that. And I feel really like blessed and lucky that I've gotten to develop those relationships. And I feel like she knows me really well and knows what I'm trying to do now. And I know her, and we have a lot of trust. And that's like a really rare gift. So after The Girls from Corona del Mar sold, I was like, what if I can't do it again? What if I'm bad at writing books now? And so I determined that before it got published, I wanted to have a first draft of something else. And so I wrote really fast a bad first draft of what became Dear Fang with Love, which is set in Lithuania from that writing program I went to, winning 3rd place when I was a waitress at Ruby's. And Lithuania is a wild, insane place. The city of Vilnius is crazy. You should definitely go if you're ever looking for like a cheap, insane vacation. It's gorgeous there and very affordable. And the book is set on a history tour, so you get a lot of the history of the city. And then after Dear Fang with Love came out, so The Girls from Corona del Mar, because it was my debut and it got a lot of attention, it got longlisted for some awards, and it sold like pretty well. Like it did good enough that no one was mad, right? And then Dear Fang with Love did not do as well. And I think it sold like 5,000 copies, which is, a lot of people are kind of shocked by how small the fiction market actually is. There's books that sell like millions of copies, but most, even New York Times bestsellers, they're usually not selling more than 100,000 copies. I mean, it depends. There's huge variance. But what I'm saying is there are very successful books that you think of as super successful that are only selling like 50,000 copies. So 5,000 copies is pretty bad. It's not like the end of the world, but it's pretty bad. So I felt discouraged about that. And I decided I was going to write, this next book was going to be like my biggest, best book. And I was going to leave it all on the court and just really knock them dead. And I wrote this extremely long monstrosity. It was about a woman who fakes her death to get away from her children, and then like lives this whole life as a lesbian in Hawaii. And then like as she's dying of breast cancer, her lover contacts her children. It's like, your mom's dying. And they're like, my mom died 30 years ago. And she's like, no, she didn't. And so then it's like this reckoning in this family. And it was just a mess. And I couldn't figure out how to fix it. Like once I showed it to my agent and my editor, I saw what was wrong with it, but I didn't know how to fix it. And I felt it was a real low point. I felt like just lost, and like I wasn't going to figure it out. And yet I really wanted to try writing another book. And so I decided to write something just for fun. And also kind of from a real fuck you place. Like, well, if I can't write something good, then I'm just going to write whatever I want. Like, F you to every writing professor I've ever had. Like, I'm done trying to please anybody but me. This is the book that I think is fun and funny and that I want to write. And that was this book. And so I feel like it's important to say all of this and tell everybody, because it can look like, I mean, Maddie made a joke before we started that she's like, are you going to tell about the part where the angel like circled your house and then said, you're the chosen one or whatever? It seems like, you think, I mean, I remember when The Girls from Corona del Mar sold, I was like, well, now I'm safe. Like I passed the finish line. This is the goal. And now I'm in these ranks of like, you know, published writers. I'm a real writer or whatever. no, there's no finish line. It's just endlessly goes on and on. And the only thing that happens is that you figure out that at the end of the day, what's left is the writing. And that's the only thing that matters, is your relationship with the writing and with the books. And everything else, the big spotlight comes and goes, and sometimes you're good at it and sometimes you're not. But if you keep loving it and you keep coming back every time the world hits you in the face, you'll be fine. And so, or at least that's been my experience. So, and then I'm going to tell you just a tiny bit about the Knockout Queen, and then we can open it up for questions and answers. So if you want, you can write your questions in the comments section and we'll go through there and we'll try and find them. Or I think that they have a thing where you can unmute yourself and just ask in person. I don't know exactly how it's organized, but we'll find out in a second. So the Knockout Queen is a hard one because the first plot point is a spoiler. So it's really hard to elevator pitch. But what I like to do instead is talk a little bit about the characters. So it's about two best friends, Bunny Lampert, who is, by the end of high school, 6'3", 200 pounds. She's a star volleyball player. And her dad is like the star real estate agent in town. And then her next door neighbor, Michael, who moves to North Shore, which is sort of like a fictional El Segundo. He moves to North Shore when he's like 11, after his mom's sent to prison for stabbing his dad. And he moves in with his aunt, and he is not an athlete and couldn't care less about sports, and is very cerebral, straight A student, works at Rite Aid after school, and also has a secret Grindr account and is meeting men in cars and making out with them and having this sort of like secret life where he can be his true self, and is feeling pretty alienated. And you wouldn't think that they would be, that they would have a lot in common, but they really have everything in common. And so it's a story of their friendship. And then basically Bunny winds up doing something on impulse that then changes their lives forever. So in a lot of ways, it's a meditation on like the unruliness of the body. It's a lot about violence, and it's a lot about sex. It's a lot about impulses, things you wish you hadn't done, people you wish you didn't love, wanting things you wish you didn't want. And it is also, as like, it's really a dark book. And it's also like pretty funny book. And so if you will let me, I would love to read like 2 paragraphs. I don't really like reading. I feel like I've been talking for a long, long time now. And the description I'm going to read is actually not of Michael or of Bunny, but of Bunny's father, Ray Lampert, who's maybe one of my favorite characters that I've ever written. The gossip about Bunny's father was that he drank too much, and specifically that he was a regular at the Blue Lagoon, a tiki bar tucked a few blocks off Main Street, though he was what was referred to as a good drunk, beloved for his willingness to spring for pizza at 2 a.m. and listen to the tragic stories of other sad adult men. There was further supposition that his incredible success as a real estate agent was due to his habit of frequenting drinking holes, making friends with anybody and everybody. But having spent many years observing their recycling bin, I can attest that such a justification would be a bit economical with the truth. Ray Lampert was turning his birthday into a lifestyle, to quote Drake. Each week there would be 2 or 3 large gin bottles and then 7 or 8 wine bottles, all of the same make, a mid-shelf Cabernet. Perhaps he bought them in bulk. It was difficult to imagine him shopping, wheeling a cart filled with nothing but Cabernet and gin through the Costco. How did someone with such an obvious drinking problem go about keeping themselves supplied? Or rather, how did a rich person go about it? In my experience, addiction was messy, a pastiche of what you bought on payday as a treat and what you bought on other days, convinced you wouldn't buy anything, and then suddenly finding yourself at the liquor store smiling bravely like it was all okay. What did the cashier at the 7-Eleven make of my own father? Did he note on what days my father bought 2 tall boys and on what days he bought the 5th of cheap bourbon as well? And did he keep a mental tally of whether he was getting better or worse like I did? Or did everyone buy that kind of thing at 7-Eleven? Perhaps my father was so unremarkable in his predilections as to avoid detection at all. And what was happening to the children of all those other men, buyers of beef jerky and vodka, peanuts and wine? What did a 7-Eleven even sell that wasn't designed to kill you one way or another? Most scandalous to me, and yet so alluring, so seductive, was the possibility that Ray Lampert felt no shame at all. That a rich man could stroll through the Costco, his cart clinking with glass bottles, and greet the cashier smiling because she would just assume he threw lavish parties, or that he was stocking his wine cellar, or that these dark bottles were just like shirts for Gatsby, talismans of opulence. But whatever it was, even if it was weird, because he was rich, it was fine. So thank you guys so much. If we want to move to question and answer, I don't know how Maddie, if you want to take over.
Yeah, that sounds great, Rufi. I think what we're going to, and thank you, by the way, that was great. I really didn't want you to stop reading. So, and I know it's hard when you just are talking into the ether and you don't get a lot of feedback. So we're going to change that right now. I'm going to talk to Rufi first, and I have a few questions prepared for her. And then after that, we're going to address the questions in the chat room. So if everybody could be patient and just stay muted for a little while longer, that would be great. You know, it's great to see into everybody's house, but you know, we don't want to be able to hear who has pets and dogs and that sort of thing. So, okay. So, Rufi, first off, your story is amazing and well-deserved. You've worked hard your whole life to get here. And it's hard when you were reading to decide what stood out most from that. But for me, it started with voice. So when you're writing these, and your novels are very different, how do you approach voice, and where does that come from? Do you hear that right away, or does that come in edits, or how does that happen? Where does that happen?
I mean, I think voice is really central for me. So the way that I tend to work, I spend a lot of time thinking about a book before I start it. And I love to work on note cards because you have no pressure to be brilliant on a note card. And so it's very low stakes. And then I tend to write an act one over and over and over again until I get it right. And then I'll write the rest of the book. And so voice finding really happens for me in those first few pages. And I'm a really voicey writer. I wish that I wrote in like this beautiful omniscient third person narration, because to me as a reader, that's like what I most admired. But it's not what I'm gifted at or what I know how to do. I still would love to climb that mountain and conquer it and figure out how that all works. I love weird narrative positions too. I love like reading like, treatises on narratology. Like I can really nerd out about it. But voice is, I don't know, like I've always had a tendency to like mimic other people. And at times I've gotten in real trouble for it, because if I'm not careful, especially if I'm drinking, I'll just like echo back what someone just said to them in their voice, because I'm just thinking about how it sounds and how they said it. And I noticed, because my eldest son does it too, and it makes his younger brother so mad. And I can tell he's not doing it exactly to mock him. He just can't not do it. And so I think that I'm just like a little bit obsessed with voices and how people talk and how people think and how that changes the way reality seems to them. So character and point of view are sort of central to always what I'm trying to get at. And so figuring out who my first person narrator is and what their voice is really important. For this book in particular, I didn't figure out Michael. I was trying to write the book from Bunny's point of view for a long time, and it was not working because she had no sense of irony. And she couldn't tell us what was lovable about herself because she didn't love herself. And she didn't have the nuance. Everything that was happening to her just felt like a puppy being hit on the nose. It just felt like pain, confusing pain. And so there just wasn't as many layers for the reader. So I knew I needed a focalizing character. And I think I tend to do that a lot. I love the structure of like The Great Gatsby or Sophie's Choice or something, where it's like a every person narrator telling you about a larger than life character, or like A Prayer for Owen Meany, like those kind of books I love.
So the voices are so different, but there are some similarities in them. And every now and then you pick up a POV kind of thing. How much of those voices are your voice? What percentage of them are your voice? What do you hear in your head when you're writing?
Well, I mean, I think that I've done a lot of thinking about that. I'm not one of those writers that feels that the characters are coming to me from some other realm. I don't feel like I'm channeling them in the same way that like I know Elizabeth Gilbert kind of feels. But I don't feel like they're me. I feel kind of like fiction writing, like novels are always the novelist dressing up in lots of masks and costumes to tell you a story. And so the characters are always a mask, and yet they're always you. You can't really write someone that's not from your own experience, because you really only have your own experience of what reality is to work with. So in some sense, like every character is me, and yet in terms of on the spectrum of writers, I tend not to write very autobiographical things, because I find it really like limiting, because then I can't imagine a way things could have like worked more succinctly or better. It's harder for me to reimagine things that really happened, if that makes sense.
It does. And I have to admit, when I was doing some research, I saw that hilarious self-interview you did on YouTube, where you were wearing the wig and you were interviewing yourself. So that gave me a lot of insight into you, I think. So let's talk about, you have this novel that you've worked so hard on, and now you're releasing it during a time when things could not be more difficult. How are you dealing with that? How are you dealing with releasing your work during the pandemic?
Well, I mean, I have honestly felt really lucky, because I've had a couple friends who it's their debut coming out, and that sucks. I mean, when it's your debut, there's so much more emotionally riding on having that moment of like, I'm a real author. Look, I'm having an event in a bookstore. My family and friends can come, and I did it. And so I feel really lucky that this was my third book, and I've gotten to do all that, and I didn't feel heartbroken to lose that. Felt more heartbroken to lose the chit chat you get to have with people before and after events, honestly, and getting to like see booksellers that I have relationships with or other writers. But moving to online events, I mean, I've gotten to do so many more events than I would have. And with writers, I mean, it's fun because we can have 3 writers all from different cities that we wouldn't have had that same event in that same way if we all had to be physically proximate. And so, and then, at first when like someone suggested to me I should make videos, I was like, oh, great. Like, I really want to make videos that make people like me and that are promoting myself. Like, this is a very natural thing for me. And then I sort of figured like, well, you might as well just make something that you like, or that cracks you up, or that you're at least proud to have made. And so like, I just couldn't picture myself like dressing up and like sitting in a chair and trying to tell people about my book. So I made the self-interview video, and we made like a little like trampoline launch party video. And I just tried to make them things that wouldn't be a waste of people's time, that would at least amuse them, if not paint me in a shining light. And so it's been a lot of fun in that sense. And I'm grateful to not have to travel and get to stay near my kids. And it's also just felt like, especially as the scale of what's going on, like globally set in, it's felt like nothing compared to my larger panic.
Your usual panic, right? Perspective,
Yes, yeah.
I guess, right? Okay, so, just talking to you and looking at the video and everything, you're so approachable and so genuine. And I sense that you have relationships with your fans and the people who read your reading, or your writing rather. Do you, what is your expectation of yourself when you're writing a book in terms of your fans, and what kind of experience do you hope that you'll deliver for them when they read yours?
I mean, I think that my understanding that I'm writing for other people has evolved, because you then deal with the reality of writing for other people, which is complicated. A lot of people, you start off in this childish place where you want to write something good that everyone will like, like that basically mom and dad will like, essentially. And then you read a few of your Goodreads reviews and you're like, well, I really won't be pleasing everyone here, and also just like, sometimes I'll read like really negative reviews and be like, oh, I'm so sorry. You should never have read this book. Like, reviews where like people are really upset because like the book starts out talking about Abu Ghraib and President George Bush, and they're like, I can't believe she spoke so disrespectfully about our president. And I was like, oh yeah, like, I can't believe you then read through all the gay sex to get to the end of the book after that. Like, how did you make it through? God bless you, woman. Like, what an act of kindness to even extend yourself into this world. Like, oh, I wish I could give you your money back, you know? So you kind of realize that you're not writing for everybody. You're writing for people that you know, that you feel like understand you, and that you understand them. And there's lots of people who are just, we all live in our own bubbles. I feel like if there's anything that we've learned politically in the last, 5 years, it's that we're living in all sorts of different, slightly separate realities. And so I only know the people that I've met in my own life, and who I shared this common reality for. And so I think I'm writing for them. Or maybe just for the hope of ever being heard. I think that this book has been really unique because there's a lot of ways in which being an author has been like really super awkward for me, because like writers are not like emotionally well-adjusted people. And I found receiving compliments to be very painful and awkward, and I didn't know how to take them gracefully. And it's still, I'm not great at it. But the difference, I think, with this book has been that instead of people telling me that it's good or something, they've been responding to the ideas and to the characters. And so it feels like I've been sending these radio transmissions into outer space from my lonely little like satellite. And then I started getting all these messages back. And honestly, like every time that I get a nice review, or from, not even from like a big magazine or something, but like just from someone, like I got this letter from this guy who was like, I think this is one of my favorite books. And in my 70 years, I've read a lot of books. And I was like, who is this 70-year-old man that would like this very weird book? Like, God bless you. Thank you, sir. And I just like cried, because it's just insane and amazing to me. I mean, really, writing a novel is an audacious thing, because you're like, I have a thing to say, and I'm gonna need 300 pages and about 10 hours of your life in order to tell it to you. I mean, that's like a ridiculous premise, really. And the fact that people are willing to read me at all, and then like write me an email, it feels really magical, and it feels really special, and I feel, and really humbling, honestly.
Well, I think just listening to you also talk about that, and the way you receive feedback, it kind of relates a little bit back, I think, to what you were talking about in terms of rewrites and taking editorial comments. What types, and you were talking about the rewrites. How many rewrites do you think you did for The Knockout Queen? And what types of things do you ordinarily add in to your writing in the rewrite phase? After you've written that messy draft that you talked about, what happens after that? What goes into the mix after that?
So I think that I spend a lot of time writing very messy, very loose, exploratory act ones. And I'll write it and then throw the whole thing away, and write it and throw the whole thing away. If there's one practical secret to rewriting, it is to open a new document. Because if you are just looking over what you already wrote, you wrote those sentences, you think they're fine. Like you wouldn't have written them down if you didn't. And so you have to start fresh, and anything that's worth remembering, you'll remember from the previous draft, and you'll find that it deepens as you write it again. And I also like to write things from different characters' points of view, so that I can understand what's going on for the other person in the scene and what their ulterior motives are. So I do a lot of what I would call exploratory writing, where I know it's never going to go into the book. I know I'm just trying to figure out who everybody is, what their backstories are, so that I have it all pre-made up, so that as I'm composing, I can just go. I also like to take all my scenes and put each one on a note card, and I have like a big bulletin board where I mark out my acts and I move them around, and I try and make sure that the plot has that shape. And so I do all that. And again, there's no pressure to be brilliant on a note card. I think that's why I use note cards for everything, from writing down like a line to an idea for a scene to an idea for a book. I mean, and then I group them with little binder clips. It's very satisfying. So I think that the difference is when I get a rewrite editorial from my agent is a brilliant editor. And one of her gifts is seeing what's not there yet. The scene that you're missing, that like a book like this ought to have, that we need a scene of resolution between two characters, or we need a scene establishing this earlier. And it's a really unique skill to be able to see what's not present. And she's brilliant at it. And so a lot of times she'll say, you know, I really wish we had a scene where so-and-so talk about this. And I'm like, oh, that would be good. And so sometimes it's the addition of material. And then, so a lot of times with her, the draft grows a little bit. And then with my editor at Random House, Jenny Jackson, it will tend to shrink a little bit. Little things like in the original draft, so Michael moves in with his aunt and his cousin. And there was originally a second cousin, so that Aunt Dee Dee had 2 children. But the little sister didn't really play a role. It was just naturalism that I didn't want too many only children, kind of. And so we just cut her. And it turned out that if you removed her completely, nothing changed. So lots of things like that that you can't see that can simplify your design and the momentum, that you wouldn't, you know, there's not a natural point at which you question, should this character even exist, until someone says, do you need this person?
Right. So if you're a writer and you're working on your novel and you're getting a lot of feedback, maybe in your critique group or from other people, or in your situation when you're getting feedback from editors, when do you push back? When do you decide I've had enough feedback, or this is important, and regardless of what you say, this is important to me? Does that happen to you?
That was a scarring lesson that I had to learn with this book, because my agent thought it should be written one way and my editor thought it should be rewritten another way. And I rewrote it the way that my editor wanted, thinking, and then my agent was like, I don't think it's good. I think that you should go back to the way that it was. And I was like, like, what do I do? It was like my parents are getting divorced. Because you really want there to be one best way. You really want there to be like a right way to do it and a best. And the thing is that it's all subjective, and different readers prefer different things. Some things get on people's nerves that other people find delightful. And so I really had to figure out that at the end of the day, it has my name on it. And I can't go to anybody and be like, well, I know it shouldn't have been that way, but you know, my editor made me. No one's making me do anything, really. And so you have to figure out what you think is the best thing for the book, and just fully take responsibility. So it's hard to get that perspective. But you kind of have to let go of pleasing anybody but yourself, I think.
Okay, that's a great place to stop. And I think before we move on to questions, can you just tell us a little bit about what you're working on now, or are you taking a break? And
sure. Well, my productivity's gone way down. Like, my kids don't go to school anymore, and I've been promoting this book. And so I haven't been doing all that much active writing, but I have been doing a lot of the reading for the thing that I want to write next. And it's kind of this crazy idea. I kept pushing it away for a while. I want to write about more like moms with school-age children world. I've written a lot about like young adults and teenagers. And in part that was because I knew I couldn't do middle-aged people well yet. And now that my kids are a little bit older, I feel like I understand the early mommy years pretty well, and what other people's marriages look like, and what my marriage looks like, and what, you know, PTA meetings are like, and stuff like that. And so I think I can do that pretty well now. And I want to do that, but I kind of want to do it with aliens and time travel as well. And so we'll see. There's every chance that I'll write it and it's going to be terrible, but it's like, I've done that before, no problem. And then I'll just write something else.
Right. Okay. Well, we'll look for that. And I'm sure whatever subject you pick, that you will approach it, and we will see the unvarnished truth in these characters, that everybody is innocent and everyone is guilty. I think I read that about your work, and I think that's a good characterization for people to listen and understand about your work, that you read it and you will make your own judgments. And I think it's the kind of work where people have their own experience, and it's different for everyone.